Welcome to Biden Brief. The content of the briefing includes: truck driver killed when train derailment collapses Colorado bridge, spilling coal cars onto highway. Biden consults with world leaders, top advisors with Middle East on edge over Israel-Hamas war. Climate group will spend $80 million on campaign ads boosting Biden's environmental record. Automakers blast U.S. plan to hike fuel efficiency rules. Supreme Court again leaves Biden administration's ghost gun rules in place. Truck driver killed when train derailment collapses Colorado bridge, spilling coal cars onto highway. The Toronto Star. A truck driver was killed when a train derailed near Pueblo, Colorado, and caused a railroad bridge to collapse onto a major highway, crushing the semi-truck, spilling coal, and mangled rail cars across the roadway and shutting down traffic indefinitely, authorities said Monday. The 60-year-old driver was initially said to be trapped in the Sunday afternoon accident on Interstate 25, but authorities said Monday that he had died. The partially collapsed bridge could be seen Monday afternoon with the semi-truck caught beneath it in the northbound right lane. Derailed train cars were piled up on the bridge and along the tracks to the northeast, and large amounts of coal covered a portion of the highway. A 9-mile, 14-kilometer stretch of I-25, the main north-south road corridor in Colorado, used by 39,000 to 44,000 vehicles daily, was shut down in what the Colorado Department of Transportation said Monday would be an extended closure. Biden consults with world leaders, top advisors with Middle East on edge over Israel-Hamas war. The Toronto Star. President Joe Biden spoke with 3 world leaders and his own national security team on Monday, seeking to address concerns about the escalating violence between Israel and Hamas. The U.S. is concerned that the conflict could expand into a broader regional war, and is also concerned about the humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip. Biden spoke with Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani, and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz about the situation. The president is considering traveling to Israel this week to show solidarity with the U.S. ally. European Union leaders will hold an emergency summit on Tuesday to discuss concerns that the war could fuel tensions in Europe and lead to more refugees. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has been traveling in the region and has spoken with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as well as with Arab leaders. Iran's foreign minister has warned that preemptive action is possible if Israel moves closer to launching a ground offensive in Gaza. Climate group will spend $80 million on campaign ads boosting Biden's environmental record. CNN. Climate Power, an advocacy group, has announced an $80 million advertising campaign to promote President Joe Biden's climate and environment agenda ahead of the 2024 election. The campaign aims to inform voters about Biden's climate and clean energy initiatives, which include ambitious emissions reduction targets and the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act. Despite these efforts, a recent poll found that less than a third of Americans knew a great deal about the IRA, but respondents were broadly supportive of the initiatives in the bill. The campaign will include digital and television ads, as well as in-person events in key battleground states. Climate Power has partnered with Future Forward, a Democratic super PAC, for its ad campaign. Automakers blast U.S. plan to hike fuel efficiency rules. Reuters. The Alliance for Automotive Innovation, which represents major automakers including General Motors, Toyota, and Volkswagen, has criticized the Biden administration's proposal to increase fuel efficiency requirements. The group argues that the proposal is unreasonable and will result in a $3,000 increase in average vehicle prices by 2032 due to penalties for noncompliance. The alliance is calling for significant revisions to the plan. Supreme Court again leaves Biden administration's ghost gun rules in place. Washington Post. The U.S. Supreme Court has reinstated the Biden administration's regulations on ghost guns, firearms assembled from kits, without the usual serial numbers and background checks on purchasers. The administration's regulations, which apply to self-made weapons the same kind of licensing and record-keeping required of guns sold commercially, will remain in place while legal battles continue. The regulations were blocked again in August by a U.S. District Judge of Texas, who also blocked the regulations as applied to 2 manufacturers who supply a large number of the kits sold nationwide. Russia's assault on a key eastern Ukraine city reported to be weakening, as the war marks 600 days. The Toronto Star. Russian forces' attempt to capture the strategically important city of Avdiivka in eastern Ukraine appears to be losing momentum, according to Ukrainian officials. Ukrainian forces repelled 15 Russian attacks on Avdiivka in the past 24 hours, compared to up to 60 attacks a day last week. The slowdown suggests that the Russian effort has deflated, said Vitaly Barabash, head of the city administration. The Institute for the Study of War also concurred with this assessment. Both sides have been seeking battlefield breakthroughs before winter conditions limit military operations. The Supreme Court orders makers of gun parts to comply with rules on ghost guns. The Toronto Star. The Supreme Court has ordered 2 internet sellers of gun parts to comply with a Biden administration regulation aimed at ghost guns, firearms that are difficult to trace because they lack serial numbers. The regulation changed the definition of a firearm under federal law to include unfinished parts, like the frame of a handgun or the receiver of a long gun, so they can be tracked more easily. The requirement applies regardless of how the firearm was made, meaning it includes ghost guns made from individual parts or kits, or by 3D printers. Suspect at large after 2 Swedes shot dead in Brussels. South China Morning Post. 2 Swedes were killed in a shooting in central Brussels, prompting Belgium's Prime Minister and senior cabinet minister to hold an emergency meeting. It is unclear if the shooting is linked to terrorism or the Israel-Hamas conflict. The European Championship football qualifier between Belgium and Sweden was postponed after the attack. The terror alert in the capital has been raised to its highest level, and the rest of the country to its second highest level. EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen called the attack despicable and vowed unity against terrorism. "I'm not a diplomat, I'm a mom." The American parents thrust into the Israeli hostage crisis. Wall Street Journal. A U.S.-born man is believed to be one of the 199 people taken hostage in the complex crisis that has ensued following an attack by Hamas in southern Israel. Since the attack, which left more than 1,400 Israelis dead, the man's parents have been on a desperate quest to find their son. The family has reached out to U.S. officials, including President Biden, for help, but they have obtained little information about their son's whereabouts. The situation has thrust the family into the center of a complex hostage crisis with potentially unprecedented global dimensions. The man was attending a music festival in southern Israel when the attack took place. He and his friend, who was also taken hostage, fled to a public bomb shelter by the side of the road. The Hamas militants closed in on the shelter, and the friend attempted to stop them by throwing unexploded grenades back at them. However, the friend was overpowered, and after a series of explosions, the militants ordered those who could stand to exit the shelter. The man was forced onto a pickup truck with 2 others and driven towards Gaza. The last ping from his phone was recorded on the Gaza border. The parents of the man are now anxiously awaiting news of their son's fate. They have contacted U.S. senators and Israeli politicians for assistance in securing his release. They are concerned that Israeli troops are preparing to invade Gaza, which would make it even more difficult to secure their son's freedom. Hamas has threatened to execute hostages on camera, unless Israel stops bombing civilian homes without warning. The family remains hopeful that the man is alive and being held in similar conditions to those shown in a recent photograph. U.S. and Israel focus on Hezbollah's next move after Hamas attack. New York Times. U.S. and Israeli intelligence agencies are concerned that Israel's expected ground offensive against Hamas in Gaza could result in Hezbollah launching a large-scale military campaign against Israel from Lebanon. Currently, American officials believe that the deployment of 2 carrier strike groups has deterred Hezbollah from attacking Israel. However, American and Israeli officials are assessing that Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, does not want an all-out war with Israel, fearing the damage it would do to his group and Lebanon. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vetoed proposals from his government for a preemptive strike against Hezbollah. Keeping the war confined to Gaza is a priority for both Israel and the U.S., as a major campaign by Hezbollah would force Israel to fight on 2 fronts, and could potentially draw the U.S. into the conflict. Intelligence agencies are trying to determine whether Nasrallah is likely to take actions he had previously avoided, what those actions would be, and whether the threat of direct American involvement on Israel's side will be enough to keep him on the sidelines. U.S. to tighten curbs on China's access to advanced chip tech. The Sydney Morning Herald. The U.S. is set to tighten restrictions on China's access to advanced semiconductors and chip-making equipment, in an effort to prevent the country from gaining a military advantage. The updated rules, which will be published this week, will seek to close loopholes in existing restrictions and include additional checks to prevent Chinese firms from evading export restrictions. The move comes a year after the U.S. first imposed chip restrictions on China, and China has since accelerated investments in developing its own domestic capabilities. Takeaways from the testy hearing over the Trump gag order and what it means. CNN. A federal judge overseeing the election subversion case against former U.S. President Donald Trump has imposed a limited gag order on Trump after he continued to attack potential witnesses, prosecutors, and the court itself. Judge Tanya Chutkan said the order wasn't about whether she liked the language Trump used, but about language that presents a danger to the administration of justice. The order bars Trump from making certain comments about the special counsel's team, or potential witnesses, but does not impose restrictions on disparaging comments about Washington, D.C., or certain comments about the Justice Department. Biden campaign launches account on Trump's Truth Social, converts welcome. South China Morning Post. U.S. President Joe Biden's 2024 presidential campaign has joined Donald Trump's Truth Social platform, using the handle @BidenHQ. The move is seen as an attempt to mock Trump and engage with his supporters. The Biden campaign has a history of trolling conservatives online and co-opting their messaging. In July, they turned a clip of a staunch Trump supporter comparing Biden to former presidents into an online ad, and after a Republican presidential debate, they posted a video of one of Trump's rivals criticizing his administration's economic policies. Netanyahu accused of planting imposters in meeting with hostage families. Telegraph. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been accused of planting allies in a meeting with relatives of the Gaza hostages to gain support for his government and the upcoming invasion. During the meeting, members of another family, who were unknown to the others, began speaking in support of Netanyahu and the government. The attendees were reportedly upset by this and accused Netanyahu of deliberately planting supporters in the meeting. A spokesman for the Prime Minister's office denied the accusation and called it false, shocking, outrageous, and unacceptable. Trump placed under limited gag order in federal election case in D.C. Washington Post. A federal judge has placed a limited gag order on former President Donald Trump, stating that he must cease making disparaging comments about prosecutors, witnesses, and court personnel involved in his upcoming trial in Washington, D.C. The order places further restrictions on Trump's statements, as he is already barred by court order from discussing elements of the case. U.S. District Judge Tanya S. Chutkan did not specify the punishments she would consider for violations of her order, but they could include house arrest, fines, or jail time. The gag order does not apply to Trump's 3 other pending criminal trials. Exclusive. U.S. negotiator expects to sign new deal with strategic Marshall Islands on Monday. Reuters. The United States has finalized a 20-year agreement with the Marshall Islands as part of its Compacts of Free Association (COFA) program. Under the agreement, the U.S. will provide $2.3 billion in grant assistance and trust fund contributions to the Marshall Islands over the next 2 decades. The funds will be allocated towards education, healthcare, environment, infrastructure, and other areas determined by the Marshallese government. The Marshall Islands, along with Palau and Micronesia, are strategically located in the northern Pacific and have become a focal point in the U.S.-China battle for influence in the region. The Biden administration has already signed new deals with Palau and Micronesia earlier this year. The agreement with the Marshall Islands had been delayed due to negotiations over addressing the legacy of nuclear testing in the region. The U.S. hopes that Congress will soon enact the COFA agreements and provide the necessary funding. More than 400,000 student loan borrowers had wrong monthly payments. New York Times. Hundreds of thousands of borrowers in the U.S. have discovered that their monthly student loan repayments have been miscalculated, often for higher amounts than they actually owed. The mistakes have been identified as more than 28 million federal student loan borrowers returned to repayment this month, after a pandemic-related relief program paused their monthly bills for nearly 4 years. The miscalculations have affected borrowers being transferred into the Biden administration's new income-driven repayment plan, known as SAVE, which bases borrowers' monthly payment amount on their income and family size. Scott will discuss foreign policy at an AP Georgetown University forum as Super PAC polls add funding. The Toronto Star. Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina will discuss the Israel-Hamas war, U.S. foreign policy, and national security at Georgetown University in Washington. The event is co-hosted by the Associated Press and Georgetown's Institute of Politics and Public Service. This marks the second in a series of talks the organizations are hosting with 2024 GOP candidates. Scott's sit-down comes as one of the super political action committees supporting his candidacy clawed back some of the advertising airtime it had purchased this fall. The South Carolina senator has not made foreign policy a mainstay of his campaign. Possible Biden trip to Israel has security, political risks. Reuters. President Joe Biden is considering visiting Israel to show support for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has faced criticism for his handling of the recent conflict with Hamas. The visit could give Biden more leverage in shaping events on the ground and boost his image domestically. However, such a trip would be risky given the tense situation in the region, and planning it poses complex challenges for the White House. Biden has been vocal in his support for Israel, but has also expressed support for an independent Palestinian state. Israeli bid to cast Hamas as ISIS hurt by Gaza deaths. Yahoo! The US, the UK and other allies of Israel have called for an end to the country's military operations in Gaza following Hamas rocket attacks on the Jewish state. The growing focus on civilian casualties in Gaza, where Israeli airstrikes have claimed more than 3,000 lives, has led to criticism of Israeli actions. Israel has spent every day since the attack collecting evidence and has tried to convince the international community that Hamas, designated a terrorist organization by the US and European Union, EU, needs to be destroyed. However, many have condemned the Israeli response, calling for the protection of non-combatants. The Middle East is particularly concerned as populations in Kuwait, Bahrain, Egypt and Jordan are restive and support Hamas. They are pressuring the US for humanitarian aid to Gaza. Israeli officials have been frustrated by what they see as hypocritical lecturing by other states, and have called on the international community to support them in their fight against terror. Hey there, folks! It's your friendly neighborhood 6 doctor here, bringing you the latest news from the 6-degree world. We've got a mix of serious and not so serious stories today, so let's dive right in. First up, a tragic accident in Colorado as a train derailment causes a bridge to collapse onto a major highway, killing a truck driver. Talk about a real-life game of Jenga gone wrong. The aftermath left coal cars scattered across the roadway, shutting down traffic indefinitely. Let's hope they can clean up the mess and get things back on track soon. On a more serious note, President Joe Biden is busy consulting with world leaders and his national security team as tensions rise in the Israel-Hamas conflict. The U.S. is concerned about the violence escalating into a broader regional war and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Biden is even considering a trip to Israel to show solidarity with our ally. Talk about being caught between a rock and a hard place. In other news, a climate advocacy group is spending a whopping $80 million on campaign ads to boost Biden's environmental record ahead of the 2024 election. They're hoping to inform voters about his climate initiatives and drum up support. But hey, it seems like they've got their work cut out for them, considering that less than a third of Americans actually know a great deal about Biden's climate plans. Looks like they've got some educating to do. Meanwhile, major automakers are blasting the Biden administration's plan to increase fuel efficiency requirements. They claim it's unreasonable and will result in higher vehicle prices. Well, I guess they're not too keen on the idea of going green. It's like they're saying, sorry, Mother Earth, but we'd rather keep polluting. And in a strange turn of events, the U.S. Supreme Court has reinstated the Biden administration's regulations on ghost guns, firearms assembled from kits without proper background checks. Hey, it's like they say, you can't ghost the ghost guns. Now, it seems like tensions are easing in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, with Ukrainian officials reporting that the Russian assault on the city of Avdiivka is losing momentum. It's like a game of tug-of-war, but hopefully, this means fewer lives lost and a chance for peace. Let's hope the ceasefire holds, and they can find a way to resolve their differences. Moving on to Brussels, where 2 Swedes were tragically shot dead, prompting Belgium's Prime Minister to hold an emergency meeting. It's still unclear if this is linked to terrorism or the Israel-Hamas conflict. But one thing's for sure, the situation is tense, and the terror alert has been raised to its highest level. Stay safe out there, folks. And in a heartbreaking story, an American man is believed to be one of the hostages taken by Hamas in southern Israel. His parents are desperately seeking answers and have reached out to U.S. officials for help. It's a complex situation that has thrust them into the center of a global crisis. Let's hope for a swift and safe resolution to this ordeal. Now, let's talk foreign policy. U.S. and Israeli intelligence agencies are concerned that Israel's ground offensive against Hamas in Gaza could lead to a large-scale military campaign by Hezbollah in Lebanon. Talk about a potential domino effect. Both Israel and the U.S. want to prevent this from happening, so fingers crossed that cooler heads prevail. Speaking of tensions, the U.S. is set to tighten restrictions on China's access to advanced semiconductors and chip-making equipment, in an effort to prevent the country from gaining a military advantage. Looks like the U.S. is saying, sorry, China, but we're keeping our chips close to our chest. And finally, in a twist of fate, former President Donald Trump has been placed under a limited gag order as he faces legal battles over the election subversion case. Looks like someone finally said, enough is enough. Will he adhere to the order? Only time will tell. Well, folks, that's all for today's news roundup. Remember, I'm here to keep you informed and entertained. Now it's your turn. What are your thoughts on these stories? Let's open up the discussion and see where it takes us. As always, stay curious, stay awesome, and I'll catch you next time in the 6-Degree World. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.